Welcome to Prime Time, a show for adults in the prime of life. I'm Susan Hoskins, the Executive Director of the Princeton Senior Resource Center. We provide programs and services for older adults, their families, and caregivers. We're a nonprofit organization and we're located right behind Princeton's Borough Hall. Today, our topic is bullying, and my guest is Barbara Simmons of the Peace Center in Langhorne, Pennsylvania. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, I came upon this topic because I read an article a month or so ago that I think has been pretty widely circulated now, and that's talking about bullying that goes on in senior communities and how there's an increase of this with more people living in 55 plus or assisted living communities or nursing homes, all of these senior living communities that bullying can take place. And this little bell kind of went off for me because I think I've heard the same kind of thing talked about at senior center director meetings for a decade now of how do we handle these kinds of things when they come up. The article talks about a woman named Doris who says, "There's a clique here that's meaner than mean. The first time I went to the recreation center, a man yelled at me, 'This is a private club. You aren't welcome here.'" And I think listening to that just sends all of us back into middle school, doesn't it?
It does, because you think, well, I'm matured, I'm a member of the community, I volunteer, and so you just assume you're going to be respected. And so when someone says something like that, or you see cliques happening, it's pretty traumatizing.
Yeah. And I think also that it's with a lot of people that I know that have moved into communities like this, you're already feeling like an outsider, that you don't know anybody, or maybe you know one or two other people who live in that community. Maybe you've moved to live near your children, but you don't know anybody in the community that you're moving into. So you're already kind of on guard to not be accepted. And any little thing that people do, whether it's, "Oh, I'm sorry, that seat's reserved."
Right.
My friend Mary sits there.
Well, the human condition is such that we want to be accepted. We want to be liked. We want to feel like we belong. And so when you get that kind of response, you're not really prepared for it. You were in middle school somewhat, and in high school, but it's a lot harder to swallow when you're a mature adult. And
sort of like, I've grown up, why am I going back and replaying the same scenario
or,
again?
you know, if I treat others with respect, why am I being treated with disrespect? Either way, it's just a disturbing thing to have happen. And I knew this was on the rise. I do mediations. We do a lot of...
Yeah, talk a little bit about what you do.
So the Peace Center, even though we're located in Langhorne, we work all over the country. But we mainly work in the Delaware Valley region. And so one of the things we do is we do something called mediation, which is if you or I were in a conflict, for example, and it was we just couldn't get to a resolution. We might bring in a neutral third party that could guide the conversation. And so we've been getting more phone calls from people from senior living. So we deal with conflict all the time, so it wasn't unusual for us to get our first phone call that dealt with senior living. But this woman was feeling threatened every time she saw her neighbor. Her neighbor was using threatening gestures, threatening look, and she called and she said, you know, is there any way that you can do a mediation between us, because I'm feeling so uncomfortable. And we said, sure, you know, we do a screening, so we have the person tell their story, then we then go to the other person, get their story, and then we set up a mutually agreeable time to come together and talk it through. And for the most part, what I see is that if there's goodwill on both sides, you've got a good chance of a mediation being successful outcome. Well, in this particular case, this gentleman was being, very much a bully, but he had had a stroke. He had been a nice guy, had a stroke, changed his behavior, so much so that he became physically violent towards people. And he was eventually asked to leave. He couldn't stay there. It really wasn't appropriate for mediation. Once somebody is physically violent, it's not appropriate for mediation. But it started me thinking, like, is this going to be a problem we're going to start to deal with? Because, even if we're in great shape, we run the risk of having a stroke and then run the risk of this behavior change. But there's another factor here. And that is that with the change in economics, what we found were seniors were needing to move into people's homes. So instead of perhaps renting somewhere, having their own apartment, they were renting a room in someone's home, which sets you up for conflict potentially. And that's what we were seeing, is we were getting more calls from seniors who had moved into people's homes, and there was conflict between the landlord or the person who lived there and themselves. And then comes the senior centers, where there's that exclusionary factor going on, or someone saying something unwelcoming to you. So all these things are adding up to the Peace Center needing to take a look at this in a new light, because a lot of our work has been dealing with bullies with teenagers.
Yeah.
And then parents, right? Parents of these teenagers end up getting into the mix, and it becomes more of a conflict.
Well, that's why I thought of you, and I wanted to, I immediately clicked on, wow, there's so much need out there for professionals, for people who work in these communities to get the skills, and who do I know who teaches these skills? And that's why I thought of you, because you've been doing these workshops for students and parents, and it really is a phenomenon that goes through the lifespan, but we just haven't been looking at it. We've just been assuming that all those little old ladies and little old men were nice people.
Or as I call them, the elders.
Yes.
Right. My dad doesn't have conflict with anybody. He's 86 years old. He's the nicest guy in the world. But if we needed to move him to a situation, which we did, we had to temporarily put him in a rehabilitation center. Well, his roommate was obnoxious. And so, I could see how quickly, and, we were there being his advocates, but not everybody has an advocate, And so people like yourself running a senior center, you have to become their advocates, or you have to become the mediators, or you have to become the directors saying, no, Jane, you're going to include Gladys in with your card group, please, because she's new in this area and we want to make her feel welcome.
Right.
So I think that you're in a good position, you and other professionals are in a good position to help people open up their hearts and open up their minds to hearing what's hurtful behavior. That's one of the first things I say to anybody that's in a conflict. Have you made the person aware that what just happened was hurtful for you? What we call I messages.
Right.
So, Susan, I really feel hurt when I don't get invited to your table to have lunch, and I really was hoping to get to know you and your friends. So that would be one of the first lines of defense, because I think we have to first not make up the story in our head that they're purposely excluding me. They don't know me. And so maybe they're just being, a little shy. So before I make an assumption, let me first use my I statement.
Right. And my experience is that, like if you're feeling excluded, we'll use the same scenario, that sometimes that triggers old history for you. Like, here I am being left out again. So your first assumption and your reaction then becomes, I've been left out again, I'm angry, I'm hurt. So part of what you do as the mediator is kind of bring it back down and say, well, let's see what other kinds of interpretations there might be. And I, as the person who says, that's Mary's chair, probably don't see myself as a bully or as an
Absolutely.
excluding person. And so you're bringing that to my attention, saying, you know, that's the third time this week you haven't let me sit at your table, helps me say, wow, is that how I want to be seen? And gives me a chance to behave in a different way.
Well, exactly. Just like kids will run and tell the teacher, you know, they won't let me sit at their lunch table. And a lot of times the teacher will say, well, did you talk to them? Did you tell them you'd like to sit with them? And so we don't want to make assumptions. And you're right, we hit those wounds. When something like that happens, it's hitting a wound from when we were in middle school or the first time we got excluded from something.
Often even before middle school.
Yes, exactly. The first time we didn't get invited to that party,
Right.
you know, in second grade. There's a lot of pain that we hang on to, a lot of memories of pain that we hang on to. Or we don't think it's still there. We think we're mature,
I've
we've moved
outgrown that.
on beyond that. But it's still there. Those wounds are still there. And so all of a sudden it brings up those wounds. Well, guess what else? It brings up that same kind of reaction that you had when you were first hurt in middle school or 5th grade or 4th grade. And so right away you've got someone saying something they may intentionally not be trying to hurt you. That might not be their goal, but that's how you've taken it, and now your back is up against the wall. And what are the chances of you being calm enough to say, hey, Mary, I was hoping to sit with you, and you know, my name's Mary's too. Could I take Mary's chair, you know, and try it if she's not here today? But I think that our natural reaction is to either get defensive or confrontational, or to back away and try and lick our wounds. So yes, we first want to check that out and make sure we're not making that assumption.
Well, that's one of the things that I noticed in this article, that it says, you know, that this woman, she was complaining she couldn't get a seat at a card table, gets the cold shoulder at the club, been chased away from seats. And it says that she now stays inside her house and works on crafts alone. And I thought, how sad, because that's not what we want to have happen in our communities, in our centers. We want people to come in and join and mix with each other. So let me go back for a second, because I think it's important to help our audience understand that we're really talking, what we're talking about when we talk about bullying, and that we're not talking about elder abuse, where you know, mom is locked in the cupboard, or mom is threatened that she's going to be beaten up if she tells anybody that we haven't fed her in a week, or whatever.
Right.
You
The
know,
more
it's not elder
serious
abuse, which
issues.
is reportable as abuse to the state. But we're talking about the peer-on-peer interactions and bullying. So.
Well, exactly, because they're two very separate issues. And I think that we have to recognize that, you know, the elder abuse has to have serious intervention. Bullying still needs intervention, but, you know, we're not needing to call the police necessarily. However, this woman that I was telling you about that called because she felt threatened by her neighbor, she did end up having to call the police because he ended up in a fist fight with another man. But that's an extreme
really an
case.
Extreme. That's really one where you can't use mediation. And yet I think what we're talking about here is the kind of things that maybe we as professionals, workers in this area, people who work in senior residences, we see these things going on. And one of the things in my conversations with people in these last couple of weeks, since we started talking about this, one of the things I've realized is that many of the staff in these facilities are so much younger that they don't feel comfortable confronting their elders. Or
Good
staff
point.
say, you are grown up, why can't you figure this out? And they don't intervene. And so things build and build and build. And so part of what I want to do, and we're doing a workshop in May for professionals in this area because we want to help people figure out how to recognize these situations and how to intervene in them more quickly, because all of us can play the role of mediator.
Exactly.
Whether you're a friend or whether you're a trained mediator, your role is to mediate, to bring that situation down so that it doesn't become an ongoing wound and somebody doesn't leave your facility. Because what happens is people stop coming.
Right.
They move out, they stop coming to the center.
And you might not even know why.
Right, they don't go to the pool anymore, and then they've missed out on so much of life, and that social part of life, which again is one of the key elements of healthy aging. And of any age, we need to be around people.
Right, exactly. And so if somebody sulks off to their room and they're doing crafts and you don't see them anymore, you're busy doing other things as a director of a program. You're busy with other things. You're not going to necessarily notice that. And
you're feeling relieved.
Yeah. Depression sets in. And yeah, then you've got a spiraling situation spiraling downward. So how do we get that situation to spiral upward? I always say, if I had a magic wand, directors of programs like yours would be trained in mediation, because we can't just brush it off. And confrontation isn't necessary. It's really just a matter of being someone who can be neutral in that moment, but willing to help them talk to each other, because they're not going to necessarily talk to each other. The human condition is such that if we try to get very tribal, right? So you have these cliques or these little tribes, and they kind of separate themselves from everyone else. It's a strange part of us human beings, but it's part of who we are. If someone intervenes and says, just in a respectful way, I would really love to see us talk this through, because I'm seeing where Jane is feeling hurt about this and you're feeling like you don't want to include her. Is that right? Do I have that right? Or, let's talk that through. And having the ability, the confidence that, you don't need to confront them. You just need to play this interventionist role, gentle interventionist. If you don't even want to become a mediator, that's fine, but become a gentle interventionist, because we all need that from time to time. We need somebody who's looking in and saying, what kind of help do you need? What kind of support do you need here? It looks like there's a little bit of a conflict going on. And giving people those skills, the professionals those skills, so that as a young person, they're making assumptions about older people. And we don't want to be making assumptions. Assumptions are what get us into trouble. And so if you're a professional, you want to be able to get those skills. But what if you're the senior citizen and you don't know who to go to, or you've just gone to the director who's young, maybe only 30-something, and she says, oh, that's just, that's your imagination. I'm sure she'll include you. Just go and sit down with them, That's very uncomfortable for that person to do. And so that professional can play a really important role by listening to what that person is saying, really hearing her or him, and then saying, what can I do to support you in this? Do you want me to go over and talk to them, or do you want me to role play it with you so you can go over and talk to them? And the other thing, Susan, is when somebody is behaving badly, we've got to be able to intervene. Again, it doesn't need to be a confrontation, but sometimes we need reminders that we're not acting so well, and that we need to be more welcoming. And so sometimes my dad, who's 86, and he's just the nicest person in the world, but sometimes he'll get a little bit curmudgeon-y. And my mother used to really be the one to say, Tony, let's calm down a little bit now. Well, she's gone. She's gone 8 years. And so when I'm in his presence, he'll start venting. And after about 10 minutes, I'll say, all right, Dad, okay, I think that's enough negative talk now. Let's get some positive talk going. And he'll laugh and he'll say, oh, that's right, I need those reminders.
Wow, that's great.
And so I think we all need those reminders.
Well, I realize that I sort of have a radar up all the time, and my staff does. And so we're aware when the tone changes. It's like listening to kids on the playground, that, there's a tone where it's happy play, or kids playing in the living room. There's a tone where it's happy chatter and happy play, and a tone when it starts to get strident or conflicted. And to just walk out, go check it out, and say, is there something going on here that we need to talk about? Helps stop it, have that conversation.
It's interesting. We tend to, when people are not looking, be more prone to bad behavior. And, if somebody is walking around and kind of watching, we'll be a little bit more mindful to behave ourselves. Again, it's just the human condition.
Yeah.
I don't like to put a judgment and call it, good behavior or bad behavior, but sometimes our behavior is less than welcoming, and those reminders are helpful. So I think that we shouldn't be making assumptions, and we shouldn't be afraid of confrontation, because it's not needed. Unless somebody really truly is being threatening.
One of the things that I did recently is just sit down with one of the people and say, there's really only 3 main rules here. That we're welcoming, that people feel safe here, and I know that that's important to you. What is it about what just happened that made that not feel that way for somebody else? That it just comes down to those sort of basic rules for being together here, and that time it worked.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I wanted to say that, using words like that is very helpful, because I see less bullying. It's really, the definition of bullying is when you're using intimidating behavior over and over again, and that you've got power over someone. I don't necessarily think I don't necessarily think it's bullying behavior as much as it is behavior that's unwelcoming, and behavior that is borders on nasty. So I wouldn't call it bullying behavior, but the impact is similar. And that's what we have to look at. What's the impact here that's having? And if it sends somebody to their room, we run the risk that they are going to start to go into depression. And that none of us want that.
So a lot of what we're talking about, I guess, doesn't rise to that definition of bullying, but it's the gossiping, the excluding, the snubbing kinds of behaviors, and that go on at any age.
Right.
We see it in elementary school, we see it in middle school, in high school, we see it in adults of all ages. So it's not something, we're not talking about something either which is a phenomenon that only happens in senior communities.
Correct. And with technology the way it is now, we've got cyberbullying going on, which a gentleman who's an expert in cyberbullying, Chuck Favada, he calls it cyber mobbing.
Talk about that.
Well, so we text a lot these days, right? So so you're mad at someone and you go to send a text to that person saying something nasty, but you actually send that text out to like 100 people.
Oof.
And that 100 people then start texting something similar to that person, and that becomes like an overwhelming bullying that has young people suicidal.
Wow.
And that's been the biggest change I've seen.
Wow.
And
So it's sort of like a flash mob targeted at a person.
Right.
That sounds really ugly.
It's very ugly. It's very ugly. And that's what we're dealing with. And then when we take it to the parents want to believe that their child couldn't possibly be part of that. And or the parents get on the phone with the other parent and says, do you know what your daughter has done to my, and the parents start fighting. And so bullying can happen to anybody. But I think in Senior Citizen Center, it might not be, we would officially use the term bullying, as often as perhaps we're needing to use it in the middle schools. But
the thing that happened for me was just thinking about applying that concept of bullying to senior communities and senior centers kind of, again, hit that bell of this is not okay. Yes, we all have examples of this. We've seen this happening. It's not okay because it's bullying. And I think sometimes we need to give people permission. You know, that with that feeling that you had when you walked in and there wasn't a table for you to sit at, it's really okay to feel upset about that, for that not to be all right. And it's really okay to go and ask for some help from the director, the activity person, to say, you know, what just happened there really made me feel uncomfortable. When that person didn't let me talk in this discussion group, that really made me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, and that's what I'll see. I'll see where somebody's dominating the conversation and that person who's got something wonderful to say doesn't get to be a part of it.
Yeah.
We have to, what I believe is, foster emotional intelligence, meaning we need to recognize our own emotions, which we're not necessarily taught to do. We need to be able to manage those emotions, which we weren't really taught to do. How many people were told not to cry because you're a baby?
It's a sign of weakness.
Yes. And that has been it's had a very powerful negative effect on us. We need to be able to recognize the emotions in others, right? So if I've hurt your feelings, I should be able to see that it's on your face, or if you've turned and walked away, I've got a sense that I've hurt your feelings. We've got to foster that in people, because when you do, the fourth thing that happens is you're able to problem solve. You're able to talk to each other, to problem solve, and that's what we're missing. We don't like to confront the person that's just hurt our feelings.
Right.
And therefore, what's the alternative? Is we go to our room, or we go and sit by ourselves, you know, and that isn't working for us.
Right. So what you're saying is, if you've had this kind of experience, first of all, acknowledge your feelings, and then to go through this process that you've just described, so that you can then problem solve it and say, what can I do so that the next time I go back, because we want you to go back, we want you to come back to the centers. What can I do the next time so that I have a different outcome?
Right.
And it's okay to ask for help with that. What about if somebody sees this going on for somebody else? You know, you're sitting across the room, or you're sitting across the table, or whatever, and you see this kind of mean behavior. What can you do to help?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that this is the bystander situation, and the bystanders can play a very powerful role. But we first have to recognize that when you are watching this happening, it's hitting wounds in you. Like, it hurts. It's traumatizing to see someone be mean to another person. You feel helpless. You feel like, oh gosh, I can't do anything, and you kind of freeze. And so you become disempowered, along with the victim. And so nobody wins. And so if you're watching it, recognize that this is upsetting for you, and recognize that you actually have the ability to change that situation. And you're almost in a better position because you've just witnessed it. And I do a little role play with people to show them how they can intervene, because we don't have those skills readily available to us. We tend to shut down. And so I need to be able to teach somebody like my dad to be able to say, you know, I watched you say something that really seemed hurtful to me, to Mary. I don't think you meant to be hurtful, did you? And so a bystander can do that. But we have to be able to give them the skills to do that, Susan. And I think that's where my, this workshop that we're going to be doing, I hope comes into play. And also, the Peace Center is bringing Arun Gandhi, who is the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi, here to Princeton. And he's going to be speaking at DNR Greenway Land Trust on May the 13th, which is a Friday night, and on the 14th at Terhune's orchards.
Wonderful.
And so we have 2 different events that people can take advantage of. One is a fundraiser. The other is he's going to be talking about bullying.
Wow.
So, so I wanted to make sure that people living in and around Princeton will be able to get in touch with the Peace Center if they want to come to that
We'll put
event.
information up at the end of the show about that so that you can get the details about that. And if you're a professional who works with older adults and would like to come to our workshop, we'll put information up about that as well. Just call the Senior Resource Center and we'll give you the information about coming to that workshop. So, Barbara, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for helping me to talk with our community about bullying and mean behavior throughout the lifespan.